So welcome to our session today. My name is Peter Mullen, and I'm one of the counselors and presenters here within American Consumer Credit Counseling. We offer these free webinars 2 every month, and we're always glad to offer them and provide you more information on them. If you want that, we can get that to you. I have my email out here so you can contact me after when we're done today or anytime, by the way, on any financial questions. I've been a counselor here for about 4 years, but I've been in the industry for probably over 3 decades. We're part of an organization, it's a nonprofit in the Boston area, and we provide not only financial literacy, but we also provide counseling. And for some folks, this is something that if they have deep credit card debt, that's one of the services that we provide. And again, all that information can be found on our website if you're interested. Today, we're talking about a very important topic, and this is one in which I think most everyone can relate, of course. And the way we work these webinars, if you're new to it, is that you are currently in a listen-only mode, but by all means, we do want your questions and comments along the way. I will break various times and ask if there's any questions, but please feel free to write them anytime into the chat. I'm assisted today by my colleague, Maddie, who will send them over to me and keep me honest and help us address those as they come up. Since we don't have a lot of folks on the line right now, it's a good chance to ask pretty much anything you want on this topic. So we did have 18 people registered across 15 states, which is always great. And a lot of good questions initially came in. So I will refer back to some of those as we go through this. Please realize at the end of today, you'll receive a copy of this recording, as well as a copy of the slides that we're going over, and then also an evaluation. So we want to continue to get your feedback. We continue to run these, like I said, twice every month, and we're glad to tell you more about future sessions or anything that we're doing here within this space. So let's get started for today. Our goal today and our topic has to do with family finances, which really brings us into a lot of important types of questions and ideas, and understandably is a challenging topic. It's one that people often ignore, but is one that really helps so many people, not only the family, but obviously the individuals as they're growing up. So we call that typically the money conversation. And so we're here today to talk about not only what are some of the things we deal with, but what are some positive approaches to how to deal with some of these questions or challenges. This is one approach. This is just one approach out of many. There's so many ways to kind of attack this over someone's life, to work with people in the family. So we're hoping that this will raise some good questions for folks and give you some good ideas as well. That's the hope and the expectation for today's session. So let's start with this whole question of the money conversation. It often is the way things begin for many families, meaning that it actually doesn't begin. Many people avoid the money conversation. As a matter of fact, a lot of the reading that I've done for today, they say that often other things come first. People are more willing to talk about death or about sex or about other things before they're willing to have a conversation in their own family. It's often very difficult, embarrassing. You don't want to reveal what you're doing, even amongst couples, which is amazing. Couples don't often tell each other what they make or where their expenses are, and it's not uncommon for couples to not share even where they're spending or accounts they have or money they might have. So there's lots of challenges here. I guess I would ask us to begin with what is the alternative? You know, if you consider the alternatives, if you don't share information, if the family doesn't talk about money, doesn't deal with it, it could set people up, especially the kids as they grow. It could even be the couple, but especially the kids as they start to grow up. They don't learn how to deal with money. If nobody talks about it, then it can be the situation that they, in fact, don't know what to do. And so as they get to the point of starting to spend money, you know, pretty heavily in their teens, are they in a good position to do that? Can they pick a good credit card? Do they know what even to look for? I've had people tell me, I do counseling as well as this, and people have told me, and I'm telling you the truth here, that some people even in the 40s and 50s will say, I never learned how to use a credit card. I didn't know that how they work. And even so much as to say, I didn't know I had to pay it back. Now, I find that a little hard to believe, but that's what I've been told by at least 3 different people. So here's the deal. If we don't talk about money, then people are a little bit more vulnerable. So an example being, that what happens a lot is that if people don't know this, then they could even be at a point of denial. And again, part of the counselees that I see many times when we try to get them to run their credit reports or talk about money, they don't want to do it. They don't want to see it. They don't want to deal with accounts or money or anything. So out of sight does not mean that it's is not important to deal with. One other quick story, and then we'll move on. And that is, the possibility that people can draw the wrong conclusion. So again, if it's you or your children, if you've never been told anything, you might come away with the wrong conclusion about the way money works or something. So my example is quickly that I remember as a kid being told by my father in the car to stop talking or else you're going to run out of words. You're going to run out of things to say. Well, my misinterpretation on that at 5 or 6 years old was that I literally only had so many words to speak. Like I was limited with 1,000 words, and if I use up my quota, I'm not going to be able to speak anymore. A good example of how we draw the wrong conclusions until we're corrected otherwise. So I think there is a question right now, Maddie. Let's get an initial question, and if there is one, and move on.
I'm not seeing any questions in
No?
here.
Okay, fine. Then let's move on. All right. So I come away with this point at the very beginning. When you're working with a family, and we all know the challenges of it, whether kids are young, teenagers, college age, or older, we make a choice as a family whether people know and talk about money, and I call it all or nothing, the family financial meter, right? Do we talk about it, or is it something that's just left off the table? My premise today in today's plan is that it's important for us to talk about, and I want to give some examples on how we do that. Okay, the principles that I suggest as we move forward that are sound financial principles, but really cut across a family as well, is recognizing that the family has goals. It's a great starting point. The family is a unit, parents or a couple, 1 or 2, 3 kids, whatever, maybe elderly folks living with you. It's a intergenerational household. It's good to set goals. It's a logical way to start. And money is often the way you finance those goals. Think about spending plans together. And this is another tip I've learned and read. Don't call it budgets. We use the word budget all the time, but really that scares a lot of people. So don't use the word budget. Talk about a spending plan within your family. Talk about the choices you're making are value choices. We often talk about many times. I've said it. I know many do. Will say we can't afford that. A child brings up and says we can't do this. We can't do that. Well, what about what we can do? What about where our money is going? Well, help us all to understand what do we value? What are the things where we want to place our money and why? Very good, important info. And then finally, very important, as you are young, but even as you grow and as you get older, unfortunately, this is a lesson that's not learned by many people that I deal with, that you should have some savings. Saving is always good. It's the foundation for so many things down the line. How can we make this happen? This is, again, I'm not saying this is simple. I'm not saying it's easy, but are there ways to make this happen? And I believe there are. I have 3 kids, so I know what it's like to raise them and deal with them, and things are not always as easy as you might say, but it doesn't mean you don't try. So here's an approach to maybe think about this as you deal with it. So if you're dealing with younger kids or teenagers or any children to start, a good way to maybe think about this is that, yes, there are age appropriate examples for things. You don't want to scare a kid about, that you don't have any money or we can't afford that and what that might even mean to them. So, and it doesn't mean you have to disclose your salary either. It's a matter of recognizing there's a right time to bring things up and introduce small, simple concepts as you approach them. maybe even going to the grocery store, maybe a moment in which they're starting to learn about making a choice of spending something or dealing with that they have to make a choice for this item or that item. They have $5. What can you buy with it? Well, you can either buy this candy here today, or you can buy this other item over here. So you're making choices. It needs to be obviously age appropriate, that fits whatever your situation is. It's built up over time. So as kids get older, they're dealing with deeper and larger issues, especially as you get into your late teen years. You get hammered with all kinds of things that we'll talk about in a little bit. But then as a parent or as somebody in the family, you eventually remove the scaffolding, as I say, because I love to do construction on the side. So for me, that concept of you're supporting them in the beginning, of course, and slowly taking away some of the scaffolding or supports, and then helping them hopefully to be independent. So here's a good way for people to think about if you're hesitant. If you find yourself hesitant, think of this. The more your kids know, or your family knows, including your spouse or your significant other, knows what you're dealing with, the more independent they will be, the more they will know what they're dealing with and what they can do. A child that learns that becomes more autonomous, more self-reliant. And hey, that's good for us as parents. If you have your child, which I call my 3 kids, in their 20s and up, they're launched. They're ready. They have good support. They know what to do. That's good for me, good for them. Another thing that's true, the whole idea of this basic money knowledge in families is not taught in schools. So where's it going to come from? You don't want people to draw the wrong conclusions. The reality is 23 states across our 50 do require personal finance in the high school. But here's the killer. Many of them are unfunded, which means they demand that they do it, but they get no money to do it. So the reality is many of them still don't do it. I'll leave you with this final thought on this slide, and that is this. Have you ever found yourself saying as an adult, I wish I had learned that in school? As they say, if I had $1 for every person who has said that in my classes, my workshops, my seminars, my webinars, I would be a much more wealthy man. But the reality is it's not there. And you just think of your own experience of what you wished you had known. We have the ability to do that for our own kids. So my focus at the beginning of this session today is talking kind of from a child perspective and moving my way through the ages. And that's kind of the focus I thought would make sense today. So let's go over each one of these principles in a little bit more depth. And again, I welcome any questions or challenges or ideas as we go through this. First thing to do, and this is what all the literature says for this or anything, by the way, you got to set your goals first. The starting point is not just to jump in and start spending money and say, let's buy this, let's buy that, let's not buy this. It's what are we trying to accomplish? And there's no reason why you can't have children involved in that type of thinking. Again, you don't have to shelter them. All people can be involved, and that's a great thing. As a matter of fact, I can say it another way. If a family is going to work together to deal with money that comes in and money that goes out, you really need everybody involved in that process. If you're trying to budget or at least recognize where money goes, if you have 2 people that are in the family and they spend totally outside of any type of a goal, then it's going to be hard for you to make any kind of a decision or have people participate. So by all means, from an early age, people can start to give ideas. Okay, what are the things we want to get? We want to buy a new car. We want to go on vacation. We want to buy a new laptop and PC for the family. So things you can do as reminders, put that picture up on the wall, put that picture on the fridge, put that laptop or that vacation on something that everyone sees. Furthermore, show progress. I have this thermometer on the left-hand side here, which shows an example of how you can say, this is how we're doing against that goal. So people all in the family participate in knowing where we're going, what we're trying to do, how good we're doing, and they recognize this is the choice that we've made. It's a positive direction, and there's an outcome at the end of this work, this this time and this work that we're doing as a family, it's a great thing. I remember my wife, when my kids were young, my kids pointed out the fact that some of the other kids in our neighborhood, they would often have these certain toys or certain food, ice cream, other things. And my wife's response to them as to why, then when they'd say why, she'd say, well, we've made a choice that we're saving money to go to Disney World. And so she made that pretty clear early on. And that was a great explanation to them that that's kind of where we're choosing to focus our money. Which brings us into the next thing of spending plans. Spending plans comes next. Again, I'm choosing to not use the word budget. Budget is often scary. Budget makes people think of restriction. Budgets make people think that this is something we can't do. I would love people in the family, and as you grow up and as your kids grow up, to think more about what can we do? What are we choosing to buy? Not what are we choosing not to buy. It's a different view, comes to the same conclusion, but it's important. I would further even say, from what I've seen in my experience, a family needs to be involved in the spending, especially, I'm going to say this, especially women many times are not included. If it's a couple, many times they are not knowing where the money goes, where it's being used. The reality is everyone needs to know. But of course, you make it appropriate as age goes. You're not going to tell a child potentially what you earn, but a family should all be involved in some fashion, knowing what you make, what is the earnings of our family, what does it take to run a household. That's only good information for kids and everyone involved. And then what is that so-called leftover money? Now, you can call it whatever you want. You can call it unassigned money. You can call it unallocated money. I just made a word today, just called it choice money, meaning this is where we have some choices of what to do. Whereas a lot of times you don't have a lot of choice in paying your rent or your mortgage or buying food or clothes or buying the heat. Those are pretty much governed by other factors. Hopefully you have some amount that you have the great challenge of assigning what to do with it. And again, as much as is possible, when the more people are involved, it gets to be something that you do as a group. So here's another example here that's age appropriate. You might have, for instance, when you go shopping for food, you might have a case where a kid is always asking for a toy or someone's looking for something else. You might put the challenge back on them. Make it a fun challenge. Say, look, if I gave you $10 right now, I would like you to select, and I'm making these up. Let's just say I want you to select today the cereal, the milk, and the bread. I'm putting you in charge of that, but you have $10. So they have to deal with that. What are they going to select? If they select a loaf of bread, and they're expensive now, that's $6, it's going to be very hard to buy the others with 4. So they begin to see that there's choices there, that they have to make maybe some get an item that maybe is not their first choice, but recognize they're trying to balance that out. So there's ways to do that. There's also such things as nowadays apps and things like debit cards now. There's debit cards for children, not credit cards, debit cards. So we're recognizing that they need to be part of the process too. Again, Maddie, if anything comes up on questions or comments, please let me know.
Yeah, there's nothing yet.
Okay, thank you. All right, value choices. The third part of our principles we wanted to mention today is this idea of value choices. And value choices involve such things as I've already said. What are we going to do with the money that we do have? Well, education is a very key part of this and anything to do with family finances. We need to learn, and especially younger people, they shouldn't be shut out from this. What do things cost? Where does our money go? What are the alternatives? I use an example like when, again, my wife does a lot of stuff with thrift stores and yard sales and so on. We don't have to necessarily go out and buy a shirt for $50 brand new off the rack. There's alternatives where you can get them for just a few dollars at various places, at thrift stores. And why can't kids see that? They absolutely can. what are our priorities? They need to have some sense as to where our money is going and recognizing what comes first. This leads us into needs versus wants, helping to understand that. And then there's other important life lesson. Sometimes good things take time. I'll give another quick story here, and that is, maybe someone will say, maybe in your one of your many stories is the child may ask, why are we choosing to drive an older car? Well, we say that we do that on purpose to be able to put our money toward other things. And maybe then you say, well, for instance, we don't like to borrow. We're not really into borrowing money, and then that maybe leads to other conversations. Some people will say you should sit people down once a month and have a discussion. I think everyone has to determine what works for them. I don't know if that's a good strategy. People will soon say, let's sit down and do this. I find it generally more effective when you do it in the moment, when you're actually there spending, because aren't we moving money all the time? Aren't we always spending money one way or another, shopping or going out to eat, whatever? A lot of those represent opportunities to talk about things. One last story here, and we'll move on, and that is that the whole thing of the pandemic. Now, the pandemic, not that it's a positive thing at all, it has made a lot of families take another look at their finances, including helping their children to recognize there's other things beyond simply just spending. Help them to realize, as we're all housebound and having to make decisions, there's an importance of saving for a goal. That's a great thing to learn. We can't all afford what we want today. Saving is a great habit to have. Which brings us to things like an allowance. Allowances are one of those decisions every family has to make. For instance, if it's going to be based on chores or not. There's a lot of refined questions here. How much to give? Is it contingent upon other things? Regardless of how you do it, giving an allowance can be a way for children to learn many concepts and open up the conversation. That's part of one of the great things here. You're starting the conversation and making it okay to talk about money versus this is something so secret, so bad, or somehow this is something evil or something that I'm reluctant to talk about it, and I come away with my own misunderstanding. This idea of sometimes good things take time. Here's another example. You might do a thing where, as a parent, you say that you'll sponsor a game or a watch or a laptop that's very basic for your child, and say, if you want something better, if you want a newer, better version, I would ask you to save for that difference. It's just another example of a way to begin to combine life, and that you may or may not be able to afford it, but it gets the kid involved, the child involved in the planning, thinking, anticipation process. It's a great way to do it. What I remember in my counseling, there was a woman, and this again is a true story, who said that when I asked her about, she was doing counseling with me, she's 45 years old, and I said, well, what did you learn about money and credit when you were growing up? And she says, the only thing I learned was my mother would say, if you need to buy something, go to your father's wallet and take the credit card out of his wallet and go spend it. Go borrow something. Go buy something. So again, not really a solid learning experience.
There's a question in here.
Sure, go ahead.
It says, can you say more about debit cards for kids? From what age? Through your bank?
Yes, I can. There is in my research, I came across where there are in fact debit cards for kids, and I can certainly send that information over. I think it's Alex, right? I am assuming it's Alex who's asking the question. I will send something to Alex. But yes, the good news is that many financial institutions are starting to learn that you can manage money without the old piggy bank. That's still fine, but there's nothing wrong with helping kids to start learn that they have a banking account, for instance, that the money they get from an allowance or other jobs they do might go in there, and that maybe they're not moving physical cash anymore, but a debit account helps them to start to see how to manage it, what's left, and keeps a record of everything they do. So I can make a point of sending that out after. If that's okay, then I'll move ahead. So what about allowance? As I said before, this is just an example of what someone might do as a parent. There's lots of things you can do to start get them engaged. This certainly gets their attention. And the spending, saving, donations, and investing is some examples of how you might break up the money they get. Everyone has to decide this, not by any means telling you what to do. It's just examples of how they begin to learn and expand their own thinking on money. This could be at 5 years old, whatever's 5-year-old appropriate for them. It might be $5 a week or whatever you decide, but they have to start learning based on your family's goals and values that so much has to go towards spending, as an example. To learn this concept at an early age will help you when you're going to the grocery store and they're begging you for toys. They start to realize that, if they have money, they can spend freely to a certain amount, but when it's gone, it's gone. Welcome to the real world. Money is not limitless. We're not saying we don't have money, but we have choices to make. Savings. And a very important lesson in life is to recognize saving is fundamental. As a matter of fact, for some of the people who did ask about, increasing your wealth as a family or even as a person, from everything I've read, the basic fundamental thing you need as a person trying to make money is to recognize how much you save. Even the book, there's a book out there called, I think, the about being a millionaire, and I can't remember the title right now, but it's like how to become a millionaire. The guy clearly says it's not based on what you make, it's based on what you set aside and save. That's the basis of all wealth. Donations is another element that you might have. People often have this as tithing or other ways that you learn to recognize there's a world greater than yourself. Yes, it's important for you to save for the family and for yourself and what you need to do, but there's other people out there. That might be a lesson learned. And then investing. Again, at an earlier age, whatever is appropriate. I remember as a kid, I can still remember this as a young age, putting dimes into a folder that eventually got put into the bank, but can still remember the look of the folder and having the dimes in there and eventually put it into the bank. And I think we used passbooks back then of some sort, but the miracle of seeing it gain interest, hey, that begins to build into other things. People have to realize that time and money go together, and there's no better time to learn that but at a young age. It does give them choices that could grow into a 529 plan, a savings account, an IRA. They start to learn about this whole bit of putting aside money for college, and even further, again, not for a young child, but for the age appropriate of 18 or over, people can start to learn, for instance, that to be on a credit card, at least the name on a credit card, that can begin to help build your credit. That enters another whole world, but that can be done at the age of 18 and up. Starting to recognize it can be part of making these things work better. So what I've covered so far, very briefly, is that one way to kind of build the environment to make things work is to recognize that all are involved and all are learning along the way. When you have an openness about financial questions, issues, challenges, you might very well find that somebody in the family, not necessarily children, asks about investments. What is an IRA? What should we do for insurance? What about this? What about mutual funds? Well, it might be something that inspires you, inspires us to research further, to read further. And you might realize that that's something you've never looked into because we don't know what we don't know. But an openness allows you to face lots of questions. Goals are very important as a family because they do give us direction, and hopefully is something that brings us together because we're rowing in the same direction and we're moving in the same way. Again, not guaranteed, but at least we are trying to contribute to a direction that we all see as beneficial. Again, if you had them involved in the early discussion, Hopefully everyone sees that. The visual that's held outside on the refrigerator helps remind us that this is what we're working toward. Exercise your money muscles and build habits. Habit is one of the most important elements of somebody beginning to have good money management skills. I don't think this is the kind of thing people learn generally in a family, or certainly not in school, but starting to realize that looking and knowing what money it is that you make, knowing where your money goes, basic things like that, and then making choices with what's left over. It sounds so basic, but so many people either don't know how to do it or don't feel the need to do it. And as a result, they're spending much more on a spontaneous nature rather than any kind of a planned nature. And then one final dose of reality I throw in here, and again, it has to be age appropriate, but maybe there's a way to have it for younger children. You can't get everything you want. It's almost like the old Stones song. You can't get everything you want, but if you try so hard, whatever, you'll get what you need. Right from an early age, one of the first shocks, right, as a teenager going out to work, that you don't get 100% of your paycheck. They take taxes and other things off. You get 70% of what you make. So, hey, got to learn that early on. As a family, we compromise and we work together. You don't get everything you want, but chances are you'll get the things that you do need. All right, let's move to teens now. We've kind of talked about children, but that's a good basis for everything we've talked about. So let's talk about the challenging teen years. Again, I've had teenagers. Thankfully, they're past that now. I remember the one word grunts at the table. But the reality is they are facing a lot. And we all know that these are the years when a lot of financial challenges are facing them and us. So it's not a them, it's an us. And hopefully they will come away from single syllables and more into a discussion about how will I, or how can I, or how can we buy a car, a laptop, go to college, whatever it might be. There's lots of things that cost money, and starting to understand the costs involved, the choices you have. You don't have to buy a new car. There is a used car. You could bike to where you're going. There's alternatives. The train, you can get the train in most cases. It's important for us to be educated. What can we do? The decisions. As I've said with credit cards, many people go into college, I've heard, who don't know the way credit cards work. By all means, I'm not pushing credit cards. I'm pushing that people shouldn't go into it without being educated. They should make good decisions. How do they know if this is a good card or a bad card? How do they know if this loan they're getting through this local state is great, or if this one through this agency is good? Well, there's lots of questions there. So they do need to understand these things. And then I ask this final question, something I see so many don't ask, because your teenage years is not the end. They're still in the beginning. So many people make decisions based in there when they're 17, 18, 19 that keep them from buying a house 10 years from now because they're over leveraged with their debt. Do they think about that when they're 17? Do they think about that when they're 16 and they're buying all kinds of things? Well, the answer is they should be. It's a bigger picture. This isn't something that you just are getting done by the time you're 19. It's something you're making decisions today that do affect decisions in the future. Okay, let's go on to couples. Couples makes another challenge as part of the overall family. And just a couple points here brings us down some other roads, but there's some similarities too. So with couples, the reality is not everybody's always wanting to be open, which brought us to our initial thing I brought out the very start of our discussion today. People often don't like to talk about money. It has lots of things related to it. You could be embarrassing how you used it in the past, your debt that you might have. Even as a couple, sometimes people hide money or accounts, what they're spending. They don't want the other to know that they like to buy shoes, or the other one to know that they like to buy lottery tickets or whatever it might be. Well, these are tough, but there are ways to deal with this, and we're gonna come up with a couple ideas here with this. But bottom line is, it is tough, and talking and being more open about it will give us certain advantages as a couple. Some people call this financial infidelity, and maybe I wouldn't say it's that strong, but everybody has to figure this out. Bottom line is, we're back to this idea that financial management is not easy, and a family can make choices about how much they share. And I'm all for doing that. And by the way, here's a quick thought for this one, and that is this. Maybe one of the solutions here is to recognize that people need money that's part of the overall household. There's household money, and then maybe there's his and hers money, or each part of the couple has their own. There's various solutions to this. It doesn't mean, even back with children, that you're fully disclosing everything, but you recognize there's chances for us to, in fact, share some mutual goals together. And then finally, as we think about maybe folks in their twilight years, our parents or our parents' parents, again, I would come away with a basic thought here is that if you ignore this, if you don't deal with it, you're going to have to deal with it in one way or another. And it's better to be proactive and open about it than to realize you're having to be reactive. And I hate to say it, but especially if somebody is getting older, is not clear on what their money is or what their situation is, it's harder for us to find that information from them. So we're back to education is important. Communication is important. Having the discussion, bringing it in the open, somehow getting it out prior to somebody getting to the point where they're not clear. They're not clear on what's happening. If they're sick, or if they're not as well as they could be, maybe it's emotional, especially if someone's heading toward a decline. You're trying to avoid those things. So what can we do? Building trust and understanding first, not waiting until somebody is near the end, but finding ways to be part of their financial life sooner rather than later. Some ideas that I saw was such things as being CC'd on people's accounts, or being part of their financial statements that come out. So maybe being copied on their statements. So you're starting to see what they're dealing with. And then you work your way into being more and more involved over time. It's tough for people. I know, having dealt with my parents and my wife's parents, there's this whole shift from independence to dependence. It's funny, it's just the opposite of children, obviously, right? They are moving from dependence to independence. So on both transitions, we have to do what we can to be involved at the right level to help people make good financial decisions. Information is key, trust is key, communication is key. Helpful human skills. I'm going to finalize today with, we've talked about some financial principles. Let's talk about some human skills that transcend this whole family discussion and practice. Number one, through everything, is communication, whether it be your children, whether it be with your spouse, whether it be with your elder parents. You have to understand where people are coming from. What is their attitude toward money? What do they think? What is important to them? What challenges did they face when they were younger? You don't realize until I can give an example for myself. I didn't realize how my wife was brought up, as an example, and she had a challenge in terms of the way they managed money. They never talked about it, and she was very anxious because she never really knew, for instance, if they would be able to afford certain things. So it put a lot of anxiety that she had toward buying anything at an early age. Well, she brought that with her into our marriage. So I didn't know that. But the more I understood, the more I could kind of understand where she was coming from, then it made less problems between us. Attitude is important. People bring all kinds of views. Some people like to spend. Some people like to save. Some people are scared of money. Some people deny money. Some people think money is evil. There's a whole host of views we get often from our upbringing or lack of upbringing. And so we bring that to the table. So how do we know that? How do we bring that? We can bring a positive attitude, which is what I've tried to say today, which is instead of maybe telling your children, we can't afford that and scaring them, maybe they take from that we're poor. Maybe they think from that we can't afford this and we're about ready to be homeless any day now. Who knows what they think? It's a matter of communicating positive. This is what we choose to spend our money on. Planning is key, both with children, as a family, any type of budgeting that you're doing. It's all about recognizing we make so much money, we spend so much money to run the household. This is what we have left over. A couple has to know that, a family has to know that, because you can't buy, unless you're going to overuse your credit cards, you cannot spend more than you make. I shouldn't say can't, you can. Unfortunately, what it does, it puts you into a deeper debt position, which is problematic down the road. But planning is when you start to think, today, what is it we need next week, next month, next year, and you plan for it. Learning all along the way, it should be something that everyone's able to learn at their age appropriate time. For younger kids, it's a simple thing, a simple word here, a simple lesson learned here as we're making a choice about what to buy, which cereal we're buying today. There's this cereal for $5, there's this cereal for $10. Which one do we choose? Which one do we pick? They're starting to see it in a day-to-day type of thing. Learning is also important for adults. There's so much to learn in the financial world. There's really lots of things that hopefully kids' questions bring us into new areas. And then last, what I have here again for today, there's just some sets of ideas, is collaboration. Hopefully the family is working together to recognize, not on every single penny that comes through, but recognize there's some commonalities that we're trying to do as a family. If we contribute to the income side, if we try to manage our expense and our cost side and our spending side, we can together fulfill some important things for the family. Going on that Disney vacation, buying that new car, getting that new computer, helping somebody go to school. These are all important parts of what makes it happen. I'll open it up again. Any questions, thoughts that want to be brought up? This should be a great time to bring it up.
I don't see any so far.
Okay, then let's end up for our session today. Our session today is, I would just say, some key takeaways. Talking honestly and open about your financing and finances is very challenging. Not saying it's easy, never did, but it is something that is so important. If we take the time to recognize some of these things, we have a better understanding, increase our understanding, but also helps us ultimately to manage the expectations and the way money is used. I like to think of it as not focusing on the money, but focusing on what money can do for us. I'm not trying to have us all be mini little accountants here and start counting all the money. It's a matter of thinking the larger picture of how do we manage it best to our own effective use as a family. Focusing on your monthly spending is both a short-term and a long-term type of exercise you need to do. But on the longer term, when you're starting to think a year or more, in most cases, unless you are very wealthy, you have to begin to play things out. Now, if you want to avoid borrowing, and if you want to avoid not being able to pay other bills, we have to manage what we have. And monthly spending and budgeting leads us to being able to make good decisions. One method that works is to recognize early on, again, as couples or as a couple with kids, to recognize it's important so we understand where people are coming from, but also recognize, and this goes to deeper, especially with couples, especially couples in conflict. I hate to say it, but often money and financial issues are what causes some of the most divorces, by the way. But if people, and I love this as a suggestion, would recognize maybe there's money that we both contribute to the communal needs, and there's some amount of money we retain separately. So an example, somebody even asked in my initial questions, what do you do about balancing out the money, especially if we have different incomes? So here's a thought that I have based on stuff I've read, and that is this. Let's just say person A makes $20,000 and person B makes $40,000. So maybe that's a proportion. So person A spends 33% on whatever the bills are. Person B spends 66% of whatever the bill is. So a good case in point, if something costs $100, person A pays 33, person B pays 66. So in the end, you're having a way to divide that up. That's, one method is fair, and you work out whatever works to you. I'm a believer that whatever a couple works out is for them is fine, as long as they agree. Last I say here is, as money events, decisions, and issues arise, it's, I think, good to be proactive, but at the same time, learn what you're facing in the month, in the day, in the week. Things are happening all the time, and they're all opportunities to have the lessons learned here. But as you're planning for the larger pictures, there's also smaller short-term events as well. All of these help us to get our financial meter, our financial meter, thinking toward being involved in more of the family's thinking on making money, spending money, saving money, and managing it as well as we can. And that's it for today. So thank you all very much. Bye now.